We're going out the hangar today to show you a project. Those of you who are familiar with Cessna 180, 185s will notice mine has some serious part missing problem. And that has to do with the current airworthiness directive from the FAA to inspect parts of the tail for potential cracks and damage and wear that might affect safety of flight. And let me show you what you're supposed to look at. I've got it jacked up here on a drum. Let me raise it up a little bit here. Get this out of the way and lower it down so we can look at it easier. The area you're to inspect is the hinge point of the stabilizer. The trim system on 180s and 185s and early 182s can have a stabilizer that actually moves up and down like this. And there's a control in the cockpit, a trim wheel, that moves that up and down using these jack screws that are, you can't see because of the boot, but they're a screw that, there's a cable that's connected to the wheel up front through sprockets, and it spins and it turns these things, and they go up and down. They go up to about here somewhere and down quite a ways. And it hinges back here in this little area, this slot. I'll show you a hinge on the stabilizer here in a minute, but it fits into this slot, and with vibration and use, and particularly ground handling, where people push and pull on the horizontal stabilizers to move the thing around, it crack can form in here, and if I could find it, I have a photo of that crack, which I don't seem to be able to put my fingers on right now, but this part right here is actually fairly new. I replaced that about 20 years ago. I had the tail off, and I noticed this was cracked where the bolt goes through here. And right here was a rivet that had popped loose, and that, I think, was for people lifting on one side or the other, particularly the right-hand side, trying to move the airplane around. But in doing that, I was able to inspect this area by just removing these bolts and lifting the horizontal stab up, pivoting on the jack screws in the front, and look under it with a fiber optic camera. Well, I'll show you that in a minute. But when I did that, on the back of the stabilizer was another component that you were to look at. And when I went and looked at all my photos I had taken, everything looked good in here where I thought the crack might be, and that's what I think prompted the notice that you had to do this work. But one of the other areas I had you look, I did find a crack, and that's on the horizontal stabilizer. Let me go back here and find it and show you what part is cracked. Oh, by the way, on the floor here, I'm finding a little picture I was going to take and show you. This is a picture of the crack that I found on this airplane 20 years ago, and the crack was right here circled in red. You can see that crack, and then you see where that hole is. That was a rivet that popped out, and that corresponds to this part here. This part moving here, partly yellow and partly blue. This airplane had been painted blue at one time. That's where all this blue is. That's this piece here. So this is exactly this. And maybe I can move in here a little bit closer so you can see it. So that was the initial thing I thought might be a problem. The only way to properly inspect that is to remove these bolts, lift the stabilizer up, and get some kind of a camera in there. And look, you can't do it through any of these other holes, because once that little tab that I'll show you the stabilizer is in this hole, it covers up everything. So let me go back here. Let me tell you why this is jacked up in the air. There's a couple of bolts here on the fuselage that hold the vertical stabilizer on. And let me get it back. And to get to those bolts, I have to put my hand up through an inspection hole in the bottom here and reach up in there to get to them. I have to have my arm completely up in here, and to do that, it's helpful to have the airplane up higher. So that's kind of handy to have a hoist like I've got up there to do that kind of work. Back here is a horizontal stabilizer set on a workbench. I finished the repair. The part that was cracked on the back of these are the little hinge points that fit down in the slot we just looked at, and a bolt goes through them and holds this in place. And it hinges from the back here, and the front goes up and down. Up toward the front, this is where the jack screws attach. Right here, there's a bracket here and here with bolts going through them. So the front end lifts up and down to control the horizontal trim. These components are doublers or reinforcement right here where the hinge point is, and this is the rear spar of the horizontal stabilizer. And what I found was that this one has been, this is a new part and it's already painted. This is the old one here that I found the crack in. And the crack, you can see a blue line here. Around this bolt hole, it was cracked. And I didn't see that until I started looking at my photos that I had taken with this little fiber optic camera that is thin enough to get down into those cracks. And I looked in here and was able to see a crack next to this bolt here. So I had to realize that the crack looked almost insignificant, but it was a part to look, instructed to look at, and having a crack in it meant the only proper thing to do was replace it with a new one. So I bought a brand new one from Cessna, and I had to drill out the rivets holding it in, and I had to take on the new part. I had to drill all the extra holes in it you see here. That hole pattern wasn't in the new part, so I had to duplicate that using a template that I created. Put it on here and was able to find a shop here in town that could match the paint. And these two rivets had to be replaced. They hold it in by rivets here, and the bolts that attach to the hinge point also hold it in. So once I got it all in here, I painted it, and the paint match is almost perfect. This paint is discolored from whatever reason. I think it has some overspray on it, but this has a very almost show quality paint job on it. So I'm trying to be very careful with it. And every time I move it, my wife Ginger helps me move it so that I don't drop it on the floor, which is a possibility. Let me walk around the back past our Amish buggy and our golf cart and show you the front, or what at the front of it is where the jack screws mount. This is where everyone keeps their exercise equipment like we do. Usually I keep my exercise equipment in the bedroom because it makes a great place to hang your clothes. The jack screws attach right here on these two mount points and moves up and down this way. I'm installing some rubber molding on this front part here, and once I get that done, I'm ready to put it back in the airplane. This airplane is painted up to match an airplane that's in the Smithsonian. And the airplane in the Smithsonian was the 1953 model 180, which is what this is exactly, that Jerry Mock, a woman from Columbus, Ohio, flew around the world by herself back in 1965. I took pictures of her airplane, which hangs in the Hazy Museum at Dulles Airport, part of the Smithsonian Air and Space. And I've got the heat on, keeping the engine warm this winter, to drive the moisture out of, so the cylinders don't get too much moisture in them and rust. Anyhow, the paint shop, using the photos I took of the airplane hanging from the ceiling at the museum, duplicated it almost perfectly. Well, the curator from the Smithsonian saw this airplane at the Oshkosh Air Show several years ago, and she couldn't tell the difference between it and the one they had hanging up. So it's an excellent paint job. That's why I'm trying to be as careful as possible, taking everything apart. And I'll do the same when I put it all back together. Tomorrow I'm going to start putting it back together. The sequence is going to be the horizontal stabilizer goes in and all the attachments tightened up and fixed. And then the vertical stabilizer, which is in that trailer over there, covered up with a blanket, moving blanket. It will go on, and I'll stick my arm up that hole in the belly to get to the nuts and bolts and tighten that up. And then the control surfaces, the rudder and elevator, have to go on and be connected up. This is a push rod right here that connects to the controls in the cockpit. That this moves back and forth and actually moves the elevator up and down, which hinges on the back of the stabilizer, which you can't see right now, but that's where it goes. So that all has to be done. Then I can hook up the cables that go to the tail wheel, steering cables, and put it all together and take it out and fly it. I don't anticipate any problems as long as I don't drop anything. I have all new hardware, attaching hardware, all new AN nuts and bolts, and we'll go in with that. And I've already checked the jack screws that they're at the proper position. I've actually had those apart. The last time I had the tail off Well, the last time I had the tail off was about 10 years ago when I had all new skins put on the horizontal stabilizer because I had some cracks and dents in it from people moving the airplane around by hanging onto it. And I also took the jack screws out about 15 years ago and completely cleaned and reconditioned them to make sure they were working perfectly. I thought maybe the looseness that I found in the stabilizer might be due to the jack screws being loose. Turns out the crack in this member right here was what was causing it to be loose. Where it bolted through here, this piece here could actually move a little bit. Now the piece that I replaced goes from this point all the way up at an angle, all the way up to here, so it's right to that last rivet. So it's kind of a job putting that in. It's a job getting the old one out and then putting the new one in, but I was amazed that it went fairly smoothly. In order to install all of these rivets, somebody had to crawl back in the tail, and it wasn't me, with a bucking bar so I could buck the rivets with a rivet setting tool. And a friend of mine was a home builder, and he agreed to crawl back there, and he was the same size as me, but somehow he got in there and out. I think I can crawl back in there, but I'd have to call 911 to get out, so I'm not doing that anymore. Well, that's about it, and thank you. We'll see you later.